Press.
Hi, is that Bob?
Yes, it is. Hi, Paul.
Hi, how are you?
Good to see you.
Good seeing you too, and thank you again for the opportunity.
I've been looking forward to this, sir. This is a terrific topic, though. I think it's something that I certainly have a lot to learn on, though, and I hope we have a good turnout tonight.
I think it's a topic that overall that resonates because the time frame is very germane to many of our members here. So it's a time frame for myself that when I started working in the insurance world after getting out of college in 1978, youthful 20s, a decent job with a little bit of disposable income allowed for travel and attendance at Major League Baseball games. So you kind of get wrapped up in it.
Yeah, that's about the same time that I went back and rediscovered baseball too. I grew up in Chicago with the Cubs and the White Sox and followed it all through my youth and high school years, and then when I went off to college, I kind of fell away from that though. But then I graduated in excuse me, in '72. And then moved to Minneapolis a couple years later after graduate school, though, and really started picking up baseball again, about the mid-'70s or so, before free agency really kicked in there. So, yeah, I agree. It's an interesting moment for those of us in, our demographic cohort here as somebody with power and SABR.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
I see you live in Beacon Falls, Connecticut. Is that in the Connecticut River?
It's actually on the Naugatuck River.
And where is that exactly?
Okay, if you're familiar with the shape of Connecticut, is more or less almost a pure rectangle with a little bit of a panhandle that goes toward New York City.
Right.
And if you put a dot kind of the dead center of the state and then move a little bit to the left, a little bit to the west, pretty much in that general area.
Okay, where are you from? New Haven, then? Just north of New Haven, then, or
northwest of New Haven?
Okay.
I think as the crow flies, we're something like 17 to 18 miles northwest of New Haven.
Okay, I've only been to Connecticut on the train and to change trains in New Haven, though, going up to Massachusetts, though. So
okay.
I haven't really spent any time there at all, though. It's one of those places I've always just gone through. It's.
Now, Bob, am I remembering correct that you have been an attendee at the 9 Spring Training Conference?
That's correct. I started going about, I want to say about 2002 or so. Okay. Is when I believe 2002 was my first year there. So I was working at the time, and I retired in 2011. And so after that, I've become pretty much a regular year in and year out, though. So I see that you've written for you've given presentations. I probably heard you before there, and I see that you've also written for the Journal 9 as well too.
Yeah, I've done a bunch of book reviews for them, and it's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed the experience. I've done a couple essays for them, and I actually was very strongly encouraged by Willie Steele to go out to 9. He says, you're very familiar with the Cooperstown Symposium. He says 9 is pretty much like Cooperstown West. So he was encouraging me for a number of years. He says, oh, you have to come out, you have to come out. So he's been regretting my appearances ever since. So.
That's terrific. Willie's a good guy, and him and David Pegram have taken that over now from the Ardells, as program directors pretty much. So, and they've done a terrific job. I mean, they've recruited some people, and what's really terrific is the past couple of years on the conference agenda is that I've seen a lot of new people giving presentations, so a lot of new attendees, though, too.
Yeah, it's nice to see some younger, fresh blood coming in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a number of graduate students from several different schools that have done presentations there, and the only problem is that is that in some years it conflicts with the SABR Analytics Conference, though, too. But I think in most years they run back to back, because I've known people that have been out there for 2 weeks at a time attending both of them, though.
Yeah, I'm a little curious to see how the calendar is going to work out, because I think it's at least 2 years ago, Willie was saying that the multi-year contract to have the double tree in host us, that they might consider moving someplace else, because the hotel rates are pretty expensive, and I don't know if they can work a better deal somewhere else, if they could tie it in with the same hotel that's being used for the SABR Analytics Convention. I haven't bothered them with that because of everything being so upside down this past year. But I just remember him saying something to the effect that they were able to secure the rates that we did get at the DoubleTree for like the next 3 years, but I think that 3 years might be expiring. Don't quote me on that, but maybe.
Yeah. Now in February, I did attend the virtual 9 conference. I don't know if you were on that
Yes.
call at all, but afterwards, what we call bar time, though, essentially, Willie and David talked about that, and we'll be there next year again, though, is what it sounds like. So
okay.
There's one there. They essentially, even though this year, they essentially took it as a pause year in our contract. In the contract, is my understanding, though, we'll be there next year. So I think that may be the last year of the contract. So
Okay.
at least in 22, I know we're going there, though, according to those two.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know, because for the times that I've attended, which is 3 years in person, we've enjoyed it both times, and we've combined it with trips to the Southwest. So we had 1 year we went to the Grand Canyon. The last time that we met 15 months ago, we actually went to Las Cruces for a couple of days. Then we made our way to Tempe. So it's nice to see different parts of the country while combining it with the baseball event too.
Yeah, let me admit a couple more here. There we go. Yeah, I like the location there because it's on that same road. It's Phoenix Municipal is right up the street there, and so it's just really a few minutes away, because I like to take in a couple of Arizona State games there as well too. I don't know how much you follow college ball, though.
Not very much.
But I enjoy seeing some good Pac-10 Pac-12 baseball when I'm out there as well too. And Arizona State is so convenient where they play there, because the A's, of course, moved over to Mesa now in the Cubs' old facility there.
I've also opened my PowerPoint slides, so those are all ready to go whenever it's convenient to do the screen share once the meeting actually starts.
Yeah, I think you're. I think you can just go from your computer here. I don't think I need to give you permission here. I have. It's been about a month since I've hosted here though, so I could be a little rusty here though. But I don't recall having to give the presenter permission though to enter. I think just do a screen share and you're in.
Okay. Yep. There it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Once I mouse over the bottom of the screen, then it appears. Okay.
Yeah, you should have a little button down there. Yeah.
Yep. And in your last Halsey Hall meeting, Stu indicated through the chat message he sent me that he was not going to be in attendance tonight.
Yeah, the Twins are. He might be working Target Field tonight though, because the Twins are home playing the Orioles here.
Okay.
So that's usually he's in on these though, but I suspect the reason he won't be here is because he's a Target Field as the official scorer tonight.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So he'll be raising havoc there.
Well, I got two evenly matched teams here. The O's and the Twins have the exact same record here, though, both well below 500 though now.
Okay.
So this will be an interesting series. I think fans in both cities will be keeping an eye out for this one here. What's your local chapter there in Connecticut, Paul?
It's Smoky Joe Wood.
Okay, sure. Mm-hmm.
Which is that's Steve Krabisky's been our president for quite some time.
Yeah, I think I've met Steve at a convention before.
He's one of those great trivia mavens. I think his team finished first a couple times. I forget exactly when, but I know that they've had some pretty lengthy duels going into the final rounds, and some of these things I'm just amazed at the knowledge these guys have. Where they put their team of 3 or 4 guys together and they're at it all night. And I know they prevailed for one national convention. I forget exactly what year that was, but they did come out as champs at least one time.
Yeah. By the time the trivia event rolls around, though, it's been a pretty full day for me, though. So I like to get out and stretch my legs, in the town that I'm in, or, I'm kind of all analytics and baseball history out by that time of the day. So I will be looking forward to Baltimore next year, though, too, because it was a bummer to have it, canceled 2 years in a row here because of the pandemic, though.
Yeah.
So
I was just talking at length this morning with David Krell, who's another symposium guy, and he's done the SABR convention also a number of years, and he's restricted his travel to basically the greater Northeast. But we were both saying this morning that we're looking forward to getting down to Baltimore next year.
Yeah, I love the ballpark there. The first time I was there was very, like in the late '90s, as I recall. And I've been there. I think I've been there for, I don't know. I think we saw 3 or 4 games there or
Okay.
so. But
Yeah.
but I want to get down to Washington. I've never been to Nationals Park, and I want to get back to Philadelphia though, because I do have some friends in Baltimore and in Philly though. So I'll probably spend an extended period of time out there, next year.
And my slide presentation is basically 9 slides. And if I go roughly 3 minutes a piece on each one, that I think I pretty much cover all the ground that I need to. And as the moderator, feel free to break in to give me the high sign to say, you got 5 minutes to go or whatever, just to help me. I'm going to jot down the time so I kind of have an idea of when to start looking to wrap up.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to leave it up to you, though, on the honor system here, because usually we give it an hour, for a schedule, though. But if the discussion keeps going or enough questions, though, that's not a problem at all, though, in my opinion, though. So
Okay.
good baseball discussion is always valuable, is the way I feel.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, 35 minutes, and then 15 minutes or longer for questions that's fine though. Yeah.
Okay. I'm keeping a copy handy in case there's any trick questions here.
And I've got your bio that you sent me. Thanks again for sending the bio yesterday here though too, for reference here though. That way, I can tell people what your background is though, and some of the other stuff you've done.
I should have proudly mentioned that my first national SABR appearance was at the Minneapolis convention in 2012.
Oh, you got to experience our hot, humid weather in July then that year.
Oh yeah.
That was actually my first convention, because I had been going to 9 in Arizona a number of years before I joined SABR. I didn't join SABR until I retired in 2012 or so though. So I figured, now I'll have some time to spend with this though, which I didn't before. I was at Target for 35 years though, and just did not have the time.
Okay.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, Howard.
Looking forward to hearing Paul's presentation. Hi, Paul.
Good evening, Howard.
And welcome.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you with us. Hopefully we'll get more people, even though it's over 80 degrees outside.
Is it up to 80 now?
Let's see. And the Twins is playing right now. 1-0. Meanwhile, I have the weather picture coming up. But with the pandemic ending, athletes have a board meeting in June. It's 84 degrees.
I had the pleasure of joining your last chapter session back about maybe 2-3 weeks ago, and I'm still savoring the presentation by the gentleman who gave the talk about all the team jerseys that he collects.
Oh, that was at our spring meeting. Yeah, that was at our spring meeting. That was fun. Yeah,
that was a terrific presentation. I really enjoyed that because jerseys are one of my things. I have a couple myself, but they're very, very limited in scope compared to what he has, and I just really enjoyed him pointing out the differences in the styles and such, and how easy it is or difficult it is to get some of those items.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's a little easier now, I think, though, with a lot of teams, selling them in their team stores, game-worn merchandise too, though. But, some of the special event ones, though, could be pretty rare, though.
Yeah.
What's the most valuable jersey?
Of mine?
Yes.
I have a Bobby Grich 1980, I want to say it's 1986 jersey, a road jersey, so it's the gray. I also have a Gary Pettis from 1984, I think, which was his rookie year, number 20 before he changed to number 24. And I have a reconditioned Brian Downing, and it was listed as reconditioned. I'm not sure what year that is. It's probably late 80s or so. But that's all that I have. But obviously, it's slanted toward my Angel fandom.
What are your thoughts about the Angels releasing Albert Pujols?
Well, given the track record that he had, that he was falling off before he even signed for the big contract, for the big money, and you look at the playoff appearances that came the Angels' way for all the years that he played there, it's, you know, kind of ambivalent. His best years were with the Cardinals, obviously, and for a guy that was, you know, how old is he? 41 years old or so. That unfortunately the team really wasn't going anywhere with him, and I think it's just it seems to fall in line that he was a better value than Josh Hamilton, but I don't think that he was the value that the team envisioned when they signed him for the $250 million or whatever it was back 10 years ago.
But Trout's down too.
Yeah. Yep. 6 to 8 weeks.
Yep. Paul, how did somebody from Connecticut become an Angels fan?
Well, Bob, if you're a member of Nine, I wrote an essay for them just explaining exactly that situation. It appeared in, I think it was the last double issue. And before it was published, I sent it to Jean Ardell because she and I have been good friends ever since we met at the Cooperstown Symposium back over a decade ago. It's kind of a long story, so I was happy to write that essay and really publish the whole thing in its entirety. But it goes back, simply stated, it was back in the days when they were just running out from the hat with the halo that was actually sewn onto the top. That was an interesting novelty. And then the clincher, though, a couple of years after that, just I think 2 years later, was when Nolan Ryan appeared. And so he quickly became my favorite pitcher and still is my favorite all-time pitcher with all the strikeouts and the no-hitters.
Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of people come by their favorite teams via a favorite player or so, though. You know, not necessarily by geography, though. You know,
in this neck of the woods, it's Yankees, Red Sox, of course. So
exactly, yep.
And being in Central Connecticut, we're kind of on that unofficial dividing line, if you will. Although it's that line is pretty blurred depending on how well the Red Sox are doing. I was just explaining to somebody a couple of weeks ago that the Yankee fans seem to hang in, you know, good times and bad, but when the Red Sox are doing lousy, it seems like all the fans just fade into the woodwork. And then when they're, you know, surging to first place or whatever, then everybody drags the hats and the jerseys out all over again. So,
yeah, I think that's the case with most teams, though. It's I get that feeling with the Twins here as well, too. Though it's you know, a lot of them have disappeared in the past couple months here. We're gonna wait a couple minutes here before we start. See if anyone else joins us here, though.
Okay.
With the weather warming up like this, I noticed on the SABR events calendar that there's fewer and fewer virtual presentations scheduled here, though. So I think that we may be a victim of the coming warm weather. As also the fact that people can jump in on the YouTube channel at any time to watch virtual SABR as well too, which I think is what most people do now.
Yeah, I'm scheduled to speak to the Rhode Island chapter with Len Levin. I forget what the date is. They originally set it for, I believe it was June 19th, which is a Saturday afternoon. And somebody put out the suggestion to put that off till the following Wednesday or Thursday, having it in the middle of the week at night rather than on a nice Saturday in June when everybody's going to be out running to the beach or planning vacations or whatever. So I think that was a good decision.
Yeah, we didn't want to schedule that. We wanted to stick to like a Monday through Thursday format for our Zoom calls here, though, and so. I don't know how many more we'll have this summer here, though. You know, for like author presentations, though, we might. We're starting to get back in the swing of things with some live events here. We've got a live book club meeting next Saturday, I believe, in St. Paul, where we're finally going to get back together, though. But you know, things are slowly starting to come back to normal here, though. But I still like to keep, you know, some of the Zoom events like this though too, because it gives people in other parts of the country, a chance to check in.
St. Paul, since you're from Connecticut, do you know Jim Wyman?
Yes, he's a member of our chapter, and he's one of those guys that's big into the vintage baseball.
He was a member of the Quick Jets.
Okay. Yeah,
One
that's
of-
right. Yeah, he has roots out there, I think, and originally.
It's 7:05 now. Why don't we get started here? And since it's a small group, after Paul's presentation, let's just speak up if you have any questions. But right now, we are recording, and so if anyone object to that, you can leave. And if you all put yourself on mute, so Paul can give his presentation, I'll introduce him here. Paul Hensler is author of Gathering Crowds, Catching Baseball Fever in the New Era of Free Agency. And there's the book. Paul's a baseball historian who's written 2 other books, and he has also done many reviews and has published in the Nine, the academic journal, and lives in Beacon Falls, Connecticut. So with that, Paul, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Bob. And as we discussed a little bit earlier, what I'll do is I do have a PowerPoint presentation. I'll be sharing my screens in just a moment. I'm going to take the audience through chapter by chapter very briefly, just to give an overview of the book, and hopefully that will be in about 30-35 minutes or so, and then we'll take questions. And if it's a limited audience, that's okay, but maybe people can just shout out their questions, and we'll take those in turn. But right now I'm going to go for the share here. And how are we doing with that?
That looks good. You're in good shape there, Paul.
Okay, very good. So the book was just published about a month ago. I think April 18th was the official release date, and they seem to be pretty much on schedule. But Roman and Littlefield is my publisher, and they came up with a very interesting photograph to put on the front of the book. And as I was doing the research through this, it had a very bland title of Baseball Book 3, because I just didn't know what to give this for a title. But as I was doing the research and some of the writing, I realized that one theme, especially from the business point, that was going on during this particular time frame was that attendance at Major League Baseball from the beginning of the free agency era, which I've defined as 1977, really going through the 1980s, is not quite on a straight line. Of course, attendance dropped significantly during the strike year of 1981. But there's this creeping attendance that increases throughout the years. And it just seems as though free agency be damned and all the big salaries, that the popularity of the game just kept growing and growing. And all of a sudden, the theme of the former This Week in Baseball television show, that closing theme, the title of that is Gathering Crowds. So it seemed to be very appropriate. And I had to work a little bit with the subtitle, Catching Baseball Fever in the New Era of Free Agency. Really seemed to tie everything together, because Roman and Littlefield isn't really crazy about putting specific dates in the title or the subtitle of the book. So it actually came together pretty well, that this is one of those rare occasions where the author actually had a pretty good say in what the title of the book would be. And in chapter 1, I deal with labor issues. And of course, you can't talk about baseball and the major league level without getting involved with labor issues. And throughout the mid-1970s, once Curt Flood had failed in his challenge to the reserve clause, we had the striking down of the reserve clause in December of 1975 with the Seitz decision that basically rendered the reserve clause not quite invalid, but reinterpreted as being only in effect for 1 year. It was not anything to be intended renewed every single year by the club at the option of the club, that one year renewal meant exactly that, a 1-year renewal. So once players in earnest began to play out their options in 1976, 1977 became the really big first year for free agency. We had Reggie Jackson going to the Yankees. We had the trio of free agents going to the California Angels, Bobby Grich, Joe Rudy, and Don Baylor. Wayne Garland goes from Baltimore to the Cleveland Indians. So we have a limited amount of big name players that are jumping teams, signing for astronomical salaries, which of course we've kind of redefined what astronomical is over the last couple of years, but relative to the time, these were extremely big salaries. And there's a big labor dispute in 1980. There's almost a strike at the end of May of that year, but there was a resolution that delayed what ultimately became the next strike year of 1981. But cooler heads prevailed in 1980. They delayed any job action, but come 1981, in the first week of June of 1981, the players did finally walk away. And of course, all the evil components of this were listed, because you can see on this cover of the Sporting News, we had Ray Grebe, Marvin Miller representing the owners side and the players respectively. And of course, the man caught in the middle was Bowie Kuhn. And it is not a happy episode, but they do manage to resurrect the season. They go back playing in early August of 1981. They start with the All-Star game, and it seems like they picked up and never really missed a beat. They had an extended playoff series, the divisional series, if you remember. Then they went to the regular league championship series, and they had a great World Series in which the Yankees were defeated by the Dodgers. The last game was played at Yankee Stadium. So quite a compelling year, but it's not just the strike of 1981. Labor issues will persist throughout the decade of the 1980s. There's also a very brief 2-day strike in August of 1985 that they were able to patch up their differences very quickly there. But again, we can't talk about baseball without talking about labor issues. And this was a fairly extensive chapter to write. Those of you who are familiar with the name of Ed Edmonds, a former law professor emeritus at Notre Dame, I've gotten to know Ed fairly well through all these symposiums that we attend. He was very kind to review this particular chapter, and it turns out I had very few dents and dings in this. The source material that I use for some of this with regard to not just this particular chapter, but other chapters in the book, the papers of Bowie Kuhn. It's fairly easy for me to get up to Cooperstown to do research. It's about a 3.5-hour trip, and the folks up there were very accommodating to let me have access to select portions of the Bowie Kuhn papers. And again, that's not just this chapter, but also in the second chapter, which deals with money, of course. As we get into the 1980s, we find revenue sharing becomes for better or worse, it becomes known as the slippery slope of socialism, if you will, that why should the rich teams like the Yankees have to subsidize the poorer teams like Milwaukee or Pittsburgh, who don't have a big fan base or not drawing in revenue from various sources such as the sales of merchandise. This becomes very controversial, and this was a very challenging chapter to write also. But again, going back to the Kuhn papers and looking at some of what's going on in the internal workings of the game with regard to revenue sharing and superstations coming online were another big issue as well. The superstations were causing a problem because if we use Ted Turner's WTVS, the superstation down in Atlanta, that signal is being beamed all over the country. So why should I, if I live in the Midwest, why should I go to see the Kansas City Royals when I can stay home? I'm paying for cable television. I can stay home and watch the Braves. So immediately now we have the Atlanta Braves kind of pivoting themselves through the superstation that they become the self-titled America's team. But this rankles quite a bit because you had Gaylord Broadcasting in Texas that was beaming their signal from Arlington to other parts of the country as well. So this is a crossing of networks also. We'll get into change of team ownership a little bit later, but WOR in New York was trying to do the same thing with the New York Mets. We had New England Sports Network for Red Sox broadcasts, etc. So this becomes an issue as far as crossing the signals of games broadcast from one location, beaming it to other areas because of the superstation phenomenon. And hand in glove, if you will, labor issues and money. There's also the collusion issue that comes into play when Peter Ueberroth takes over. All of a sudden, there was little demand for big name free agents such as Andre Dawson, who played out his option in 1986. And as a future Hall of Famer, he certainly had a lot of the street cred, if you will, as a player. He had certainly etched himself as one of the premier players in the National League, and suddenly finds that nobody's willing to bid for his services. Backing up just a couple years beforehand, you would have mediocre talent, you'd have mediocre outfielders that were doing fairly well getting contracts, and here you have a superlative ball player who's not getting any offers at all, and he finally goes to the Chicago Cubs and offers the Cubs just a blank contract, asking them to just fill in whatever amount they thought was fair. 1987, he goes on to win the National League MVP, but the collusion issue never went away. It was contested in court. The damages from that extended for many years thereafter. I believe the total bill for all that came to something like $280-something million. And if some of these players, such as Kirk Gibson and Lance Parrish and Andre Dawson, had been given fair contracts to begin with, it would have cost the owners collectively far, far less than the damages that they had to pay through the legal system. So there's a lesson to be learned there, but this is part of the Ueberroth legacy. What was interesting in the course of doing the research with this was that I found in the Bowie-Kuhn papers a meeting that Kuhn held with some of the higher ups in the front offices of the commissioner's office, and he specifically mentions that they're meeting with attorneys right now. They couldn't delve into too many specifics, but in essence, what I determined this, and I devoted space in this to the new book, was that to me it seemed to be a smoking gun with regard to the earliest hints at collusion, that you've got offers that maybe shouldn't be made to these players, and just let them see what happens when the market tries to shake itself out. I found a memo that was really quite compelling, and again, that was in the files of the Bowie-Kuhn papers up in Cooperstown, and that's included in this chapter on money. Of course, there's transitioning from late 1970s into the 1980s. We have several commissioners who do serve. We have the ending of Bowie-Kuhn's term, kind of a tragic figure in a way, that he's bounced out of office in 1981, but there's a great difficulty in finding a replacement for him because given the circumstances of what had happened with the fallout from the baseball strike, and there's a cabal of owners led by Jerry Reinsdorf and George Steinbrenner who want to see Kuhn removed from office. The position of a commissioner is sort of a no-win situation because he's supposed to be the lord over baseball, but yet he reports to at that time, report to the 26 owners. So he was really at their beck and call as to whether he would be able to continue in that capacity. So he's kind of in a no-win situation. I think his best year was probably 1969 when he came seemingly out of nowhere to replace the completely inept Bill Eckert. And it might be easy to say, well, anybody could have filled his particular shoes, but I think at that particular moment in history, he was the right man at the right time. But certainly the trials and tribulations that extended through the rest of his first term and then into his second term, falling out of favor with the owners who eventually dumped him. The owners turned to Peter Ueberroth, a travel agent executive who was the head of the 1984 Summer Olympic Committee in Los Angeles. Turned a profit because he was a very hard-driving businessman, and he ran the organization of the Olympic effort in a similar fashion. I found a great quote about him that he ran into some low-level workers at the Olympic program at lunch one day, and one of the women asked him if he could do something about perhaps getting them a little bit more pay. And his very, very chilly answer to her was, "You don't really understand what our mission is here." So here you had these people basically working for peanuts and just asking for a little something extra because of the amount of time that they were devoting to the Olympic effort. And he really gave them the cold shoulder. So a very hard driving businessman, very dispassionate. He liked baseball, but not nearly as much as the man we see on the far right-hand side, Bart Giamatti. Giamatti was very well equipped with regard to love of the game. Probably no commissioners love the game more than Bart Giamatti, but he has a very short 5-month, very tragic commissionership. Comes to office in April 1st of 1989, and he unfortunately passed away in early September of that year. He was a heavy smoker, and the stress and strain of having to deal with the Pete Rose situation, the final adjudication of suspending Rose, issuing a lifetime suspension, really took a lot out of him. And of course, he goes on vacation to finally get away from it all around Labor Day in 1989. And he suffers a massive heart attack, and there was nothing that could be done to revive him. Taking his place, and this is why I have in the title here, A Tale of Three Commissioners, and a fourth, of course, we have to touch a little bit on Faye Vincent, who was hired in as a deputy commissioner. He was a very good friend of Giamatti, and that upon Giamatti's unfortunate passing, the baton was immediately passed to Faye Vincent, and he guides the major leagues through the World Series with the unfortunate San Francisco earthquake. So he's tested right away also, and it's quite compelling that neither did Vincent find favor with the owners, just the same as Kuhn didn't find favor with the owners. Uberoth had decided to beg out after 5 years. He was not going to fulfill his whole term because he could see the writing on the wall that the owners were not going to ask him back. The same thing happens with Vincent. If we stretch my time frame of the book a little bit into the early 1990s, there's more job actions in the early 1990s, and of course the horrific strike of 1994 that cancels the World Series, and it really becomes a dagger in the commissionership. And of course, Bud Selig ultimately is appointed as an interim commissioner and is officially given that title, but that's a different subject for a different book because it's beyond the time frame of what I'm trying to cover. We can't talk about baseball at this time frame without discussing the privation of drugs. And I specifically don't touch on steroids, only the very, very end of the chapter, because we're not quite there. We do have the influence of steroids later on in the decade. It starts to take ugly roots in the late 1980s. But before then, we have the privation of drugs, especially with the use of cocaine. And this is not happening in a vacuum with regard to the world of baseball. In doing the research for this, if we look at the paper of record, the old Sporting News from this particular time, that I believe was the NFL notes, had its own section called the police blotter, because so many players were being arrested for cocaine use and possession. And this really hurts baseball dramatically, because we have players like Keith Hernandez, a very young, talented Mets team in the mid 1980s is really destroyed by this unfortunate phenomenon. Dwight Gooden, Darryl Strawberry. We had the unfortunate episode of the Kansas City Four, Willie Mays Aikens, Vida Blue, Willie Wilson, and Jerry Martin were all sentenced for their involvement with cocaine. Although in Willie Wilson's case, it was he was kind of lumped in as being guilty as his other three teammates. But nonetheless, this is quite a stain on the game of baseball. And I had the good fortune of being able to contact Dr. Alan Lands, who was the Mets team psychologist in the late 1980s, but he also was the attending psychiatrist to help the rehabilitation of both Strawberry and Doc Gooden. So I was able to get a little bit of information from him on a different presentation that I gave at the Cooperstown Symposium. But nonetheless, that information was very important to my research and my writing here for this book. As we move through the 1980s, we don't have a lot of new ballparks going up, but we do have some of note. The cookie cutters that came online in the 1960s, such as Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, the Oakland Coliseum, and of course those beautiful gems such as Three Rivers Stadium and Riverfront Stadium and the Vet in Philadelphia, that they all looked the same because they were perfectly rounded fields to accommodate football and baseball. Artificial surfaces, the outfield dimensions were always symmetric. Richie Hebner had the great quote saying, when I step to the plate, I can't tell what ballpark I'm in because they all look the same. This starts to change a little bit in the 1980s, and you folks out in Minneapolis are very familiar with this. And of course, the photograph you see on the left-hand side, the Metrodome, with the hefty bag out there in right field. This becomes a little bit of a turning point, at least, that with the air-supported structure, similar to the Pontiac Silverdome, that this was a little bit of a break from the traditional cookie cutters, but nonetheless, the game was still played away from sunshine. It was played on an artificial surface. And then we really have a takeoff in technology with Sky Dome, which opened in 1989 in Toronto, right at the base of the CN Tower, or as it was called back then, the CN Tower. Retractable roof. It could be opened up to allow sunshine, and also very swirling winds, which plagued the very opening game. The winds were quite gusty, but they did have beautiful weather, wind notwithstanding. And it really came to the fore with regard to new modern amenities. There was a Hard Rock Cafe restaurant out in the outfield. There was I forget what the brand of hotel was, but some of the rooms you could rent rooms or suites that actually had views of the field. So it was really state of the art at the time that it opened. And I think many of us will certainly remember that not too long after this stadium opened, the Blue Jays really began to solidify themselves as a power in the American League, and they had 80 sellouts, 50,000 crowd sellouts, and drawing 4 million fans, which is really unheard of. 1 million always seemed to be sort of that magical figure back in the 60s and early 70s. And then, of course, as the Dodgers gained in popularity and everybody had to go to Dodger Stadium, and eclipsing 2 million was really something. And here you had Toronto, a Canadian team, actually being the first to eclipse 4 million in attendance. And even though Camden Yards, Oriole Park at Camden Yards came online in the early 1990s, the seeds of Camden Yards began to formulate in the very late 1980s. So I thought that was fair game to include in this particular chapter. Memorial Stadium was pretty much reaching the end of its life expectancy, and Janet Marie Smith went to a ball game and very innocently learned about this project at the Inner Harbor in Baltimore with regard to a new stadium that was going to be built. And she was able to secure a job and became the lead architect of that particular project. And she led the fight to maintain the old B&O warehouse, that beautiful long brick building that you see out beyond right field. She led the fight to keep that, because the original plan held that that was going to be leveled and just made to see part of the skyline of Baltimore toward the Inner Harbor. And she was adamant that that facility should be maintained just as is. And of course, they cleaned up the brick. The interior has been repurposed for conference rooms. The Orioles have office space in there as well. If you've been to a game there, the street right out in front, in between the grandstand and in right field, the bleacher area, there's Utah Street, and that's where Boog Powell has his barbecue joint. So it's really teeming with life before, during, and after games, where the fans can just mingle around. And it just adds so much character to the ballpark. And this was the first of what we refer to as the retro series. And Janet Marie Smith, again, was the prime mover and shaker with that particular effort. So take me out to the newer ballpark in the 1980s. We have fewer coming online, but yet we're turning the corner and getting away from the cookie cutter stadiums. I devoted a chapter on expansion, rumors of expansion, and ownership changes, because from the business side of baseball, this is something that's always going to happen. And even though no expansion took place once the Kansas City Royals and once the Seattle Mariners had joined the American League, it was quite interesting that we always saw rumors in the newspaper that Oakland had fallen on very, very hard times. They were always seemingly rumored to be purchased by Marvin Davis, the wealthy oil man, and moved to Denver. Buffalo and Louisville had very good minor league attendance for their AAA franchises. There was talk of having a new major league team go into one of those cities. Tampa built a stadium on speculation with the intent of possibly drawing the San Francisco Giants or the Chicago White Sox there. And of course, the Cleveland Indians playing at Municipal Stadium, which gained notoriety as the Mistake by the Lake, because it also had reached the end of its life expectancy. there are a lot of these issues with regard to stadiums that were used as pawns to be able to broker better deals to get a newer stadium built. And the White Sox were key among them, that they got the new Comiskey Park that was finally built and opened in the early 1990s. So all these changes of ownership and teams were in flux. We had the sale of teams such as the A's transferring from Charlie Finley to the Haas family. We had the sale of the New York Mets, the last of the line of the Payson family, Linda DeRelay, selling out to the Doubleday group headed up by Fred Wilpon. That just changed very recently also, but nonetheless, all these things are very much in flux and all part of the business environment of the game of Major League Baseball. I devoted a chapter on what I call front office architects. Several are Hall of Famers: John Schuerholz, Pat Gillick, and Whitey Herzog, the first three there left to right. They eventually made the Hall of Fame. Schuerholz began in the Oriole organization, but he really cut his teeth with the Kansas City Royals. It was a success story that culminated in the Royals winning the World Series in 1985, a real touchstone event that he got to cut his teeth in kind of building a franchise, not quite from the ground up, but working very closely with Lou Gorman to get that off the ground. And again, surviving the ills of the Kansas City drug trials, the Pittsburgh drug trials, the impact that it had on the Royals in 1984, and they were able to really right the ship in grand style and win the 1985 World Series. Pat Gillick is a big mover and shaker in Toronto. He has a lot of major league experience. When he finally reaches Toronto in the early 1980s, makes very good use of the Latin American talent that's available through the work of Epi Guerrero in bringing this great talent to Toronto that formulated the lineup that Bobby Cox was able to put out there, and later Cito Gas. And this, of course, really bore fruit in the early 1990s when the Blue Jays won consecutive World Series titles right before the strike of 1994. And I include Whitey Herzog here too, because even though he was hired by the Cardinals as a manager and general manager, he steps away fairly quickly from the general managership. But nonetheless, even after Joe McDonald took the reins of that particular office, Whitey Herzog still pretty much had his stamp of approval on trades that were being made to formulate the Cardinals roster. So I did include him as a front office architect. And of course, he had experience prior to this with the New York Mets, field manager for the Kansas City Royals, and then later on served in the front office with the California Angels or Los Angeles Angels or whatever they were called by that particular point in time. And because of the success of the Los Angeles Dodgers through the 1970s and into the 1980s, I did include Al Campanis with this group, even though he did not make the Hall of Fame. And of course, he has that horrific gaffe in the Nightline interview of April of 1987 on the 40th anniversary of Jackie Robinson's breaking the color barrier. But we cannot deny Campanis the work that he did when he came into the office of general manager officially in 1969, and cultivating everything that came out of the Dodgers farm system. So we had great prospects like, of course, the great infield that served them with Garvey, Lopes, Russell, and Say that lasted for so many years. Other talent that he brought along, such as Pedro Guerrero. He was very in tune with what was happening in Latin America, in scouting talent down in the Caribbean. So we cannot deny him his place. I do deal with the gaffe that he had with the Nightline episode. I deal with that in an upcoming chapter. But nonetheless, here, as far as front office architects, these gentlemen here were the prime movers and shakers at that particular time. I had a lot of fun writing this chapter because marketing the game became such an integral part of the sport and with the revenue stream. The upper left-hand corner photograph you have there, that is a picture of a manifest that I found in the Bowie-Kuhn papers, and it's dated August of 1982. And it lists some of the licensees and the products that were offered by a particular manufacturer. And what's so compelling about it was that at this particular point in time, there were 85 licensees who sold products that had a Major League logo on it or some sort of a tie-in with Major League Baseball. By the time Peter Ueberroth leaves office, this number more than doubles, and we have the Major League logo plastered over everything. It's no longer just caps and jerseys and jackets. We're getting into all kinds of things like houseware products and floor mats for your car, disposable lighters, all kinds of drinking glasses. The list just goes on. And by licensing these products out to all these different manufacturers, this is part of the revenue stream that just has cash flowing into the coffers of Major League Baseball and their respective teams. We have new ways of how we're looking at Major League Baseball statistics. In 1985, we have the introduction of the Elias baseball analyst, Seymour Seawoff and Steve and Peter Hurd come up with new ways of looking at statistics, and they get into the real nuts and bolts, not the sabermetrics that we necessarily think of today, but they came up with a great comprehensive way to be able to look at how players perform against right and left-handed pitchers, how certain pitchers are against left-handed and right-handed batters. They had wonderful ways of slicing and dicing all this particular more traditional data that we were familiar with back in the 1980s. This particular publication lasted through 1993, and it was really quite compelling. It was always something to look forward to when it came out every year. And I would argue that information contained in those particular books were useful if you had a rotisserie league team, because if you had a lineup that featured, and I'm just making this up here, but just to give you an example, that if, let's say, Pete Rose was going to face Tom Seaver in a particular matchup, you might not want to have one playing against the other for the reasons that one might not hit well against the other, or a pitcher might be not as effective against particular batters, that you can adjust your roster in particular ways. But rotisserie league, which really in essence the earliest roots of what we refer to as fantasy baseball now, this really became a popular feature when Dan Aukren organized this in the early 1980s at the La Rotisserie restaurant in New York City. We also have marketing the game through charitable efforts in this neck of the woods up here in New England, Massachusetts in particular. We have the Jimmy Fund, the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, fighting cancer in children for over 60 years now, almost 70 years. They've had a wonderful tie-in, wonderful working relationship with the Red Sox for all this time. The game also changes in the marketing sense because now we have an explosion of availability of baseball cards. The Fleer Corporation in 1975 filed suit against Topps because Topps had exclusive right to produce bubblegum cards. The case was finally adjudicated in favor of Fleer in 1980, and the following year, with Topps having lost their exclusive rights to print baseball cards, all of a sudden Fleer jumps on the bandwagon. Another company called Donruss introduces cards later on. We have Score. By the end of the 1980s, 1989, we have the real high quality upper deck cards also joining the market. So this is all part of marketing the game as well, with the interest in hobbies. And I touch on this in the lower right-hand corner. In 1984, we had the introduction of Randy Hundley's Chicago Cubs Fantasy Camp. This was the original of the fantasy camps. Again, somebody else's brainstorm saying, gee, what if you got a bunch of the old Cubs together, in particular, the 1969 Cubs? What if you got a bunch of those guys together and you had average fans who had relatively deep pockets, of course, to be able to pay the fee to go to the camp, spend a week in the same spring training facility, got all the accoutrements that a modern Major League player would get, stay at a first-class hotel, you have use of the Major League facilities in spring training. I did this myself in January of 1992 when it was really quite an experience. And of course, this has spawned many imitators. There's probably not too many Major League teams that don't have a fantasy camp, but this was the original that was formulated on the 15th anniversary of that great 1969 Chicago Cubs team that did not win the NL East divisional pennant. I deal with societal issues in one chapter. This is probably the longest chapter in the book. And again, there are racial issues that never go away, but we also have an expansion of women trying to cut their teeth and get a firmer toehold in being able to cover the sport of Major League Baseball, in particular access to Major League clubhouses. So going across the top, again, we have that the notorious interview of Ted Koppel and Al Campanis on the Nightline program on the eve of Jackie Robinson's anniversary of breaking the color barrier. We have Melissa Lutke, who was a credentialed reporter for Sports Illustrated. She was denied access to the Yankee locker room during the 1977 World Series, and this caused a flap because she was making the argument of you can't claim that a major league clubhouse is a private facility when after the World Series is over, you're in the clubhouse with television cameras and everybody's hooting and hollering because the World Series is over. So you're broadcasting images from the clubhouse. So how private is it? Why can't you have women go into the locker room? And this became a persistent issue. And next to Melissa, we have up in the top right-hand corner, Claire Smith, who became the first recipient of the J.G. Taylor Spink Award. She's in essence inducted into the writers wing of the Major League of the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. And she had her own trials and tribulations, most notably just when Peter Ueberroth came to office in early October of 1984. She is set upon by members of the San Diego Padres, members of the John Birch Society who hassled her in the visitors clubhouse at Wrigley Field. Steve Garvey dragged her out into the corridor and gave her the interview because he understood that as a working member, a credentialed member of the working press, that she was entitled to be able to do her job. They've been very close friends ever since. Down at the bottom, we have Glenn Burke. There's a recent biography that's just been published about him, the first openly gay major league player. On the bottom there in the center, Jim Eisenreich. We have awareness of Tourette's syndrome. And of course, Jim Abbott was born without a right hand, but still persevered to become a good major league pitcher, also pitched a no-hitter for the New York Yankees. So these are very inspiring stories of people who had overcome physical handicaps in being able to etch very notable major league careers for themselves and be inspirations to other people as well. That's it. Coming into the final portion of the book, I do have a recap that kind of ties all the various themes together. And again, Roman and Littlefield did a really nice job with the cover. Bob, I know we spoke before we came on the air here, and you mentioned that Dan and Gene Ardell were the organizers of the 9 conference for many years. And Gene was very kind to give me a nice blurb on the back of the book. And she mentions the fact that you could really see that this was probably my favorite era of Major League Baseball, having learned so much about the game and following it so closely. And I think she hit it right on the head. But it was a very enjoyable project for me, and I'm looking forward to any questions that anyone might have in the audience there. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. So we have a small group here tonight. I'm going to suggest that people just speak up if they have questions or comments. So feel free.
I know the people that had done pre-orders on Amazon for the book, and again, this would obviously go back a few months. When the book was officially released, I got the promotional code that we see incorporated in the slide there, and there were subsequent comments posted on the Baseball Books Facebook group, and said, "Oh, it worked out okay. I was able to cancel my order and get the 30% off with the promotional code. So if that offers any incentive, then please have at it."
Thanks for putting that up. Say, I'm gonna lead it off with a question for you, Paul. Here. And one of the fascinating things about this period is the absolute boom in merchandising, MLB merchandising that you covered briefly there. You know, and it also goes along with the skyrocketing interest and the bubble really in collecting, especially the bubble in baseball card collecting. But I'm wondering, getting back to merchandising with MLB, how much of that was driven by them looking over their shoulder at the popularity of the NFL, the National Football League? Because as I recall, they started going heavy on the marketing at about the same period in the 1980s.
Yes, that's very true. It took a while for baseball to get caught up, but then what they were able to do, and quite successfully, was through introduction of what I believe is still called the Cooperstown Collection. And all of a sudden now we have a spawning not just of current Major League apparel, but also the retro uniforms. So we have the old Yankee uniform. We have one of the first symposiums I went to up in Cooperstown. One of the attendees was wearing a very nice Ted Williams replica jersey, and it had that special Cooperstown Collection tag that was in the tail of the shirt. The big grab with a lot of the merchandise is that they finally realized you're not getting a cap, and I'm just using the Yankees as an example. You're not just getting a Yankee cap, you're getting the exact same cap that the players are wearing. So you're not getting a knockoff, an authorized knockoff, if you will. I know it's a contradiction in terms, but you're actually getting the same cap that the players are wearing. You're able to order the same jersey and have it customized with the player's number, your favorite player's number. So these were big selling points. And not only that, but as expansion of the retail business continued, this also spread out into retail outlets that normally wouldn't have carried merchandise like this. So J.C. Penney began setting aside floor space that was devoted specifically to Major League merchandise. And of course, this would vary by particular city. So, for example, and I don't know if this actually happened, Bob, you could probably verify this, but so if you have a Target store out in Minneapolis, they may have devoted floor space to Minnesota Twins merchandise. I do include in the book that the Cincinnati Reds opened up a clubhouse shop at a nearby amusement park, I think it was. So again, these retail outlets are being spread out, and not only that, but they're also the merchants themselves are paying a little bit extra to have that ubiquitous Major League logo sign displayed in the window to indicate that you're not getting knockoff merchandise. You're actually paying. You're actually able to buy the genuine article. So this really had a lot of influence in being able to get the same thing that the players were wearing. And just behind me here, for whatever reason, I decided not to put this on today for the meeting, but in New Haven, Connecticut, very close to where we live now, back in the 80s, there was a company called Starter. You might remember they had the jackets and such. And this was officially licensed, so this is a kind of a pretend jersey, if you will, but nonetheless, it has the sanctioned logo that the Angels were wearing at that particular time. So being able to get the real merchandise as authentic as it could possibly be, this is a big drawing factor as well. And again, you're not just getting caps and jerseys and T-shirts, that sort of thing. You're able to get sleeping bags. You're able to get towels. You're able to get bed sheets and housewares and drinking glasses. So again, all these products just kept getting propagated more and more and featuring the Major League logo. You want to go to your buddy's house in outside of Boston, Massachusetts for a card game. He's got a deck of cards with the Boston Red Sox logo on it. So, that sort of thing just kept creeping more and more into everyday life. And this was just a huge attraction for selling more and more merchandise that was authorized.
Yeah, I remember when the Twins opened up a couple of shops. There was one downtown. There was one or two at suburban malls here, though. And those are big deals. I mean, they were happening in every city where there was a Major League ball club, though. Because before that, really the only way to get merchandise, even a hat for that matter, or a team jacket, was to go to the ballpark, though. I can also remember ads in the back of the Sporting News. So I think there might have been some really off-brand companies that were doing mail order at that time, though. But I don't recall any off-site, and by that I mean outside the stadium, retail outlets for teams until the 1980s.
This is a little bit out of the time frame, but it steps back a bit before we began the presentation, Bob. You're asking about how I became an Angels fan. I mentioned about by 1969, I was really infatuated with that hat that had the halo. It was embroidered right into the top of the cap. And I secured a copy of the Sporting News, and sure enough, there was an ad in the back, and I believe it was a place in Chicago that sold all the hats for all 24 teams. So I got my mother to write a check for me for, I think it was $3 for the hat, sent it off, and a couple of weeks go by, and I come home, and there's it's kind of like a shoebox size, and I'm all excited. I cannot wait to open this up and get my hat that has the halo embroidered in it, because it's going to be the real thing. I open up the box, and this was the year that they changed to that lowercase a logo. you cannot believe the disappointment in. I longed for that halo hat, and I ended up. I took some model paint. I actually painted a halo on the top of it just to make it the way I wanted it to be. But again, that was in 1970. They didn't keep that lowercase a too long. They went with the regular triangular capital A, if you will. They switched after just a couple quick years with that lowercase a. But that particular company, I believe they were in Chicago, and I think they advertised that they sold at that time hats for all 24 major league teams. But again, we've segued into the new era cap company. I found information up in the Kuhn papers with the marketing information that they had up there. The cap sales just went completely crazy. Everybody wanted a cap, and then again with the introduction of retro styles, that the jerseys and the caps, that became another apparel line completely unto itself.
Paul, I really enjoyed the talk, and it looks like a fun book. A question for you: Did you spend any time with Uberoth and him trying to get drug testing, and the union pushing back in the mid '80s? And what were your conclusions there?
Yes, the drug chapter was fairly extensive, and the big controversy at that time, and Uberoth was making the argument because obviously this was during his tenure, and he wanted to have the sport be as clean as possible. What was happening was that they were trying to force it on the players, and it turned into a situation that you had to, in essence, what they're trying to hold was that if you took a drug test and you proved your innocence, then you're okay. If you did not take a drug test, then you were going to be assumed to be guilty, and it went counter against our American justice system. You're not there to prove your innocence. Somebody has to prove that you're guilty, and this was a big sticking point. And forced testing on major league players just did not happen. It would not. We would not get into this a resolution of this until the 1990s. So I do touch on this in the drug chapter on what was going on at that particular time. That there's great resentment against players by players against having this forced on them. That you had to prove your innocence. This is what it was coming down to. That said, it was just a very, very difficult situation, not only for baseball, but basketball, professional football. Again, when you looked at the sporting news at that time, and you looked at I think it was Howard Balzer had a one-page notes column in the sporting news, and part of that was actually headlined that said police blotter. And it was a whole rundown of, this player was arrested for cocaine possession, this one was arrested for cocaine possession. And basketball and football were particularly hard hit by this. So it's happening to baseball is fallout of what's going on in society. That it's not happening to baseball in a vacuum. That there are other sports, other segments of American society that are being affected by this.
Say, Paul, when you were at Cooperstown, did you? I know that back in the '80s, it seemed like Denver was in play every time there was talk of a team moving. Also St. Petersburg, though. As well too, at the White Sox rumored to go there before Comiskey Park 2 was built, though. But what kind of correspondence did you find in regards to relocation at that time, or rumors of relocation at the Hall?
At the Hall of Fame itself, what I found with regard to expansion, and this goes a little bit, I'm veering off your question just a little bit, but at the time that Kuhn himself was still in office, and I did reprint the content of this memo in the book, he sits down with an executive meeting, and he has several columns in this paper. I wanted to get an actual reproduction of it, but the Hall didn't have copyright to it, so I had to just list the names of the cities. I wanted people to see his actual handwriting. But nonetheless, he goes through a bunch of cities and ranking them by what he thinks would be likely possibilities for cities to expand to. And he also has one column that's devoted to all internationals, which was quite compelling. So they're looking beyond the continental North America, if you will, that Mexico City was in play. You had places like Hawaii, destinations that were going to require a little bit of travel that were beyond the traditional bounds of North American baseball as we've always thought of it. And this happening while he's still in office, I found to be quite compelling. And some of that hasn't exactly come to fruition, but we have had Major League Baseball seasons opening in Mexico City, for example, in a more recent year, or in Tokyo. So some of this is borne fruit, even though the ideas of this were basically almost 40 years ago. Some of that has come true in dribs and drabs, but there's been obviously no major league team has been established in a really far away place.
Anyone else there?
In fact, I'm going to look very quickly to see if I can find that column.
You know, it's interesting because I had never heard of Honolulu being in play before, though, or even mentioned, though. I know Mexico City's been a few times, and I can recall even Louisville for that matter, too, but not Honolulu.
Okay, yeah, I did find it. It's not in column form. I just have it as part of the narrative. As autumn of 1983 approached, more than 20 cities spread across many time zones were listed in the commissioner's notes as potential sites for new ball clubs. There were the usual domestic prospects: Buffalo, Denver, New Orleans, Phoenix, Tampa, Miami, and Washington, along with a host of surprising entries: Brooklyn, New Jersey, San Antonio, Columbus, Louisville, Indianapolis, and Honolulu, but also included were some south of the border and in the Caribbean: Mexico City, Caracas, the Dominican Republic, San Juan, in Canada, Vancouver, and in the Far East, Tokyo, Osaka, Seoul, and Taiwan. Hume also jotted down the possibility of a third major league entering the fray, as well as the formation of a club that would serve two regional cities, Miami and Tampa being a case in point. In that instance, I think he was envisioning that you would have a split schedule of roughly 40 games in two different cities, that you would have a regional team, similar to what was proposed for the Bay Area for the Giants. Giants also playing half their games in Oakland if the A's happen to move, and also splitting of Baltimore, Washington was another scenario as well, to create what would be termed a regional team, more so than a team devoted to one particular city.
Say, a question about the superstations here. When were they phased out, and what was the agreement and if you can spark our memories here, what was the agreement between baseball and media regarding that? Because I'm curious when the last. Because I can remember WOR, WTBS, WGN, in the 80s and 90s. And, of course, WGN lingered on as a superstation here in the Midwest with the Cubs until really not that long ago.
Yeah, I think they had relatively good staying power, and again, especially through the time frame that I'm covering in the book. So, in particular, the franchise, and I just ran across this one also. The Phillies were also involved with their own consortium. Bill Giles was involved with that. So there's, you're right that there's several franchises that this was in play for, but. I think really until things started coming online with MLB TV, it was pretty much beholden to the superstations. But I found a very interesting memo, and I believe it was through Bill Giles, talking about, and of course I can't find the specific reference, but he makes reference to, wouldn't it be neat if we had like a warehouse in the sky with all these games? And that memo was written, I think, in 1983. And it was one of those things I found in the folder. And I said to myself, boy, this is really something, that here you have, we have almost instant availability of any game played anywhere through MLB TV. And here we are in the earliest 1980s, almost 40 years ago. And Bill Giles just kind of throws this out as, here's this real pie in the sky scenario where you would have access to almost any game through whether it was a satellite system or what have you. But there would be a facility that would make that happen. That would make that availability for virtually any game that was played. And that memo was really fun to find. That was in the Kuhn papers also.
They're talking about archiving games at that time, really, too. And,
Yeah. Yep.
well, listen, if there's no further questions or comments, I'd like to thank you tonight. This has been a great hour. And be sure to pick up the book, Paul Hensler, Gathering Crowds, Catching Baseball Fever in the New Era of Free Agency. This has been recorded and should be up on the SABR YouTube channel within a couple of days.
And my thanks to everybody out at Halsey Hall for making this a great evening. It's my pleasure.
You are welcome.
And thanks for your help in setting this up, Howard. We appreciate that.
Thank you, Bob.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Yep. Have a good night.
Good night.
No.